This series is made possible by the generous donation of Stifel Financial and viewers like you. Thank you.
I'm Mark Buttram, the Fire Chief for Grass Valley Nevada City Fire Department.
My name is Sam Goodspeed. I'm the Division Chief for the Nevada City Fire Department and Grass Valley Fire Department.
And I'm Alex Gamelgard. I'm the Police Chief for the City of Grass Valley.
Just in general, both cities have been very proactive in passing vegetation management ordinances. Grass Valley did theirs last year. Nevada City mirrored Grass Valley's and passed that this year. So what those do is change the municipal code and allow us to have a little bit more authority when we go out and do vegetation management practices, both on commercial and or private residence properties. By doing so, obviously, it helps mitigate and reduce some of the fire loading within the communities. Part of that's public works assistance with tree trimming, things of those natures that include emergency vehicle access into neighborhoods and brushing the side of the roadways back a minimum of 3 feet in the two cities. I'll let Sam talk about the program that he's going to institute here in the next couple of weeks within Nevada City itself.
In addition to the vegetation ordinance that Chief Buttram talked about, we've also in Nevada City initiated a residential chipping program, and that's available to residents within the Nevada City limits. And what we'll do is once they fill out an application and they meet the guidelines, then we'll come out and chip wood piles, debris piles, free of charge. We just provide the vehicle, the personnel, and the chipper to do the work. It needs to be stacked on the roadside. It needs to be easily accessible, is of a certain size and weight, and we return it directly to the property where it can be turned into mulch and recycled that way. This is a pilot program that we've just instituted. We're going to try it for 3 months, the end of April here, May, June, and July, and then we'll reevaluate the program and see how successful it is and see how much interest it's generated in the community. That's correct. There's a fillable application that a user could type in their information and email it directly to me.
Yeah, so from the police department side, well, I should back up and say, in addition to what the pilot program in Nevada City, which is going to be a great asset within the city and kind of a way to gauge interest and things like that, we obviously, and I'm sure you're aware, the Firewise Communities and then also the Fire Safe Council and their chipping program that would cover the traditional areas in addition to what Nevada City's doing. But from the police department side, it's a question that's a little outside of the general purview of law enforcement, but what we're doing at the police department is trying to be proactive related to fire risks and mitigating those risks specifically related to the homeless population and camping on unimproved and uninhabited parcels. So what we do there is work with property owners to ensure that there aren't illegal campsites occurring on their properties, and if they are, give them the resources and the tools and the staff to help mitigate those. And then also proactively we're doing foot patrols coordinated with the fire department on some of those larger parcels where we know this kind of activity has occurred before, and we're also doing proactive overflights with our unmanned aerial small aircraft, so a drone essentially with infrared in order to see if there's campfires and things like that.
Another service we provide upon request is if a resident of either Grass Valley or Nevada City would like to have a defensible space inspection, they can call either of our offices or our fire stations and request that free of charge. We'll come out to their property and we'll do a defensible space inspection, give them recommendations on minimum clearances and ways they can improve around their property and their homes.
Volunteers are always something that at the police department, we do have a volunteer program. We're interested in having volunteers apply with us, and if they're interested to come in and talk to us. Because really, volunteer programs should be about the person who's serving the community that is also, serving them and fulfilling them in the work that they want to do. The last thing we want to do is ask someone to do something that they don't want to do. So that's the first thing I would say, is come to the police department or any organization and kind of see what programs are there and how they might fit. And then secondly, if there's something related to the keeping our community fire safe, and if the police department can play a role, we'd invite people to come chat with us. One of the things we're doing is we're working together with the fire departments in the enforcement and recognition of properties that are out of compliance with the vegetation abatement. So, there may be a spot for volunteers to work within that capacity, provided that it's good for them and it works for us. But beyond that, we also have a robust volunteer program for other types of activities, and people should feel more than happy to come check in with us.
So on the fire side, the program that we see growing, probably the biggest most recently, is the Firewise communities. There's several within Nevada County. I think Nevada County has the largest number of Firewise communities of any of the counties in the state. So if there's not one already in your neighborhood, that's very easy to get started. A good point of contact for that would be the Nevada County Fire Safe Council. They've been instrumental in creating these Firewise communities, and that's a great level to enter and become involved with your community, getting to know your neighbors, and working to provide a safer fire environment.
I'll just echo what Sam and Chief Gamblegard said as well. I think the community engagement via volunteerism for some of the community projects that are going on or will be going on in the near future of just cleaning up, in general within the city or in specific neighborhoods is probably the best way to become involved.
There's different types of disaster plans. There's type that targets the community and what they need to do. It's difficult to get a plan that all people can get involved in and be up to speed in. A lot of it has to do with evacuations, hardening your home, again with the defensible space. In Nevada City, we do have a prepared disaster plan that can be accessed on the city website, but that's more geared to the employees and what our roles and responsibilities will be in case of an actual emergency. And that's beyond fire. I mean, it could be earthquakes, it could be flooding, weather events. So it's not just fire we're talking about. It's a disaster plan that's geared for what we see in this area.
There's a hazard mitigation plan that should live within the county's website. That's for the entire county. It covers multiple different types of emergencies, from fire to flood to earthquake to avalanche to you name it. So it's kind of generalized. It's not super specific. Both the city of Grass Valley and the city of Nevada City will have an emergency preparedness plan here before too long. Hopefully, we'll be doing some community meetings in May that will be highlighting that plan.
Yeah, I mean, all those plans are things that are definitely good to know. It's going to have a lot of detail in it, things that as staff that we're already aware of on how we would manage certain circumstances. But I think what it really comes down to for people in our community is not so much about a plan, because plans are just guides. I mean, circumstances are going to dictate how we respond as first responders and local government and state government. But the biggest thing is for individuals just to really hone in on the things that are really important, like having a plan about how you're going to evacuate, know your evacuation routes. If you have special needs, make sure you have those met ahead of time. And there's information about that on CAL FIRE's webpage that's specific to wildfire readiness, and then also on Nevada County's page. And I think that's where people should really spend their time, less so than maybe the minutia of a plan. If you're involved in a neighborhood organization, then you might be instrumental in working on a plan with that organization, but there's no way we're going to remember hundreds of pages. Instead, we should remember, when we're looking at it from the citizen side, exactly how we're going to try to do our best to keep ourselves and our families and our animals safe and evacuate. And then the biggest thing for us from our perspective and our plans is that please listen to what we're saying and do what we're asking you to do in an efficient time frame, because if we're spending more time trying to convince someone to leave when it's time to leave, then it's somebody else who's being put at risk.
I think there's a lot of good places to start. Chief Gamble Guard mentioned Ready, Set, Go, a website, CAL FIRE's website, the County of Nevada's website. All these have good planning materials on them of where to start. And as we just discussed, the plan and being, the Chief Gamble Guard made an excellent point, might be 100 pages, you need to concentrate on one page. So the brevity of that plan is your page. Things like what it's in a go bag, how to put one together, items such as, have some situational awareness to the fire weather, or red flag warnings is probably the better term to be used. So there's a multitude of different websites out there that can help foster you start to think about that process.
I think the biggest thing is that people actually think about it, because I think I was at a community forum, we were talking about how many people were signed up for Code Red. So that is Nevada County's official early alert and warning system that's going to be, in a perfect scenario, the way we're going to get information out. What we do know is that in these types of severe firestorms and other critical emergencies, certain components of that system may or may not work, because it's all based on technological and physical infrastructure. But basically just that people know about that and get signed up and have good communication with loved ones who live out of the area, so that there's an accounting for them if they have to evacuate. But secondly, that we treat extreme fire weather in the same way we treat extreme regular weather. If we had a report that we're going to get snow down to 2,500 feet today, people would have been at gas stations yesterday. But traditionally, when there's reports about a red flag warning tomorrow, people are not at gas stations making sure their vehicles are full, or making sure their go bags are ready, or actually sometimes maybe making a decision whether they're going to shelter in their house that night or not. We don't see that, so what we would like to see in our community is people actually getting to that level where a red flag warning is as significant, or frankly more significant, than a winter storm watch. Well, you know what it's like, right? Like look at if you go to if there's going to be a low snow event and you go to any one of the supermarkets in town, you can't find half of the bottled water and milk and food and things like that. They sell out. We wouldn't maybe expect to see that so much with a red flag warning, but we would expect to see fuel stations being occupied, and because in some of the more recent events that we've had, such as the Lobo fire and others, we had people where we were actually performing rescue operations, and we saw this in Paradise where people were running out of fuel. And there's really no excuse for that if you're prepared. Yeah, and the fire chiefs can talk more about fire behavior, but on a wind-driven extreme fire event, we do get warning that those conditions are going to be aligning on a certain date, and that is when we can take extreme caution and prepare. Traditional fire behavior is still something we deal with in Nevada County, but usually you have a little bit more time, and that's where you need to be ready regardless, because a fire can start regardless of the weather conditions.
And Chief Gamble Guard's right. Those days where you hear a red flag and we can expect those weather conditions, those are days that are going to push fire, like you saw in Paradise and in some of the other communities. Those are days that you've received typically low relative humidity, higher than normal winds, and high temperatures. And those are the days we want people to be engaged and have some situational awareness about what's going on around them. You know, if you hear a bunch of sirens or you see the aircraft flying overhead, smoke's coming over your head, you know, we should be engaged enough to realize something's happening. We need to go seek information. And we're going to be pushing out information as fast as we can to a multitude of different outlets, but still there has to be that engagement from the community. It's a significant question, you're right, it's coming up more and more, who's in charge, and I take it you're taking from who's in charge of the fire, who's in charge of the evacuation, who's in charge of the process. Well, on some level we all are. Depending on where that fire starts and the jurisdiction which it's in and who's arriving there first and in what order they're arriving at, honestly. As an example, and feel free to jump in here, gentlemen, anytime, you know, if fire starts within the city of Grass Valley or the city of Nevada City, or we'll go with those two examples for right now, you're going to get a response, the standard response that we would send to a fire. And let's say it's a vegetation fire, so it'd be 3 engines, a water tender, and a battalion chief. That battalion chief's going to be in charge. That battalion chief's employed by the city of Grass Valley or Nevada County Consolidated Fire District under an agreement we all have together. And that individual will run that fire. That individual will also start to make decisions on evacuations, whether or not they're necessary, what needs to be evacuated. And they're going to go into a unified command with law enforcement who is responsible for doing those evacuations. That's not to say that CAL FIRE is not going to be there, because there's a real good possibility, and I'm also sure of the fact that they're going to have resources there and or representatives there. So that command post that started off with that one captain or that one battalion chief that was there kind of grows as the incident grows, and you get all these other influences into that command post. There's still one person in charge, but they're taking information and taking feedback from everybody. That command post might include people from PG&E, CHP, SO, obviously local law enforcement, the fire agencies. You can take your name of it. You know, it's a collaborative effort to make sure that the incident's mitigated, and we're doing so safely without the first primary loss of life, but also without the loss of structures, if at all possible. You flip that around and go out into the county area, into our state responsibility area, it's a little bit different. In that case, CAL FIRE is in charge, depending upon who's there first. Sometimes, especially if you're right around the cities, the city resources will be there first, including our chief officers, and they'll run the incident until relieved by a CAL FIRE battalion chief. But that same thing still transitions and takes place. There's still a unified command there. And that unified command can be all those agencies that I mentioned before, because they're all there. So you're not working in a vacuum. There's always plenty of information. There's always people around you. You're getting multiple perspectives. So it's really a collaborative and team effort that makes this happen.
Yeah, I think that, you know, for someone who's trying to understand how that system works, who's in charge, it's going to be the incident commander, especially on the onset, and as a situation grows, there will become operational periods. You will have people have to go get sleep, and then there will be one unified command center that's going to be basically running the overall incident. But there's so many pieces where there's different people in charge of different things, you know, whether it's operations, logistics, media inquiries, and all that kind of stuff. But there is one usually physical location that sometimes can be transferred to another physical location at some point, where the people who are in charge of making assignments. From an evacuation standpoint, fire personnel and incident command is telling law enforcement command who and where should be evacuated. And then we're making decisions based on that information, and also callers who are calling in, maybe they have a family member who's disabled and might be a little in a different geographical area that we need to address now, because if the fire is moving at a certain rate, we want to get to it ahead of time. But yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much covers
sums it up. I mean, ultimately, when you call 911, you don't really care what the door symbol is. You just want someone there to help you, and you know, and that's our mission. There's a lot of communication interagency that goes on that people never even know about. I mean, there's so much interoperability between the agencies that it's really quite phenomenal to watch and to see. It's difficult for someone not in our profession to understand. To you all, it looks like complete, absolute chaos. To us, it's actually a very controlled environment where we have our priorities set out, and we all operate by the same set of priorities. So it's not like anyone's any different. It's just tactically and strategically how we're going to go implement those priorities.
And this happens statewide. It's not just local. I mean, it's the same set of standards that every every fire agency operates under. So if we're going to Southern California, we can expect the same level of communication and interoperability in that location, same as if they're coming up north to where we are. So it's a pretty well-developed system that we've operated under for years, and it's second nature.
If somebody knocks on your door at any time of day or night and asks you to evacuate because of impending wildfire, it doesn't matter who it is as long as they're in official capacity. And oftentimes what we see is neighbors alerting neighbors first. Maybe one neighbor has better information than the other who's just waking up. So that's the cue right then to really start figuring out what's going on. And if you see something that's concerning, don't wait for law enforcement to come or fire personnel to come tell you to evacuate. We'd rather have you out of the area and not need to be, and then get you back in later.
There's any number of agencies that could be out there assisting with the fire. I mean, there's NCSO, Nevada County Sheriff's Office, Grass Valley, Nevada City Police Department, CHP, Office of Emergency Services, fire personnel, CAL FIRE, U.S. Forest Service. There's any number of people that get involved in these incidents and could be assisting where the need is greatest.
And I think too, we have to keep in mind, we're looking, I think, from a global perspective of the Camp Fire and a wind-driven, highly dynamic incident, and not all fires are like that. On if you want to call it an average fire weather day, and if there is such one, let's say outside of a wind-driven fire coming out of the north winds here for this area, evacuation might mean 2 or 3 people, maybe a block away. That's all. We need to move people out into safety, but there becomes a point when we're moving too many people, it just creates more issues. So we're all cognizant of that. We're all sensitive to that, and knowing that if we're asking you to leave your house, we're doing so out of sheer necessity, right, for your safety. It's not something we take lightly. That being said, we're going to engage in that process whenever we think we need to. We're not going to hold back in doing that. Go ahead.
In my experience, it depends on the fire. No two fires are alike, like Chief Buttrin said. There's all kinds of dynamics that play into that.
It depends on the type of fire, what the fire is doing, the weather conditions, the topography, the fuels, and where it's at. All those things are going to come into mind how much notice you're going to get. Well, what we call the initial attack or the first phase of fire, if we're coming to you, you're going to have very little notice if we tell you. You might see a law enforcement officer knock on your door and leave now. That's all the notice you're going to get, all right? As that transitions out from that kind of epicenter or from that initial attack area, you might get more and more notice. But our company officers, our firefighters, our battalion chiefs, they're making decisions based on all those things I just mentioned to you, and they're making a decision not to engage in fire suppression or go into life safety mode. I would say the majority of the time you're going to see us engage in fire suppression because we put the fire out, the problem stops. We don't have to worry about anything else. However, there's going to be those times, and wind-driven fires are probably a good time for that to occur, where we're going to disengage from fire suppression and we're going to engage in life safety because our primary mission is life safety. That's it. That being said, fires such as the Camp Fire, which is what is fresh in all of our minds, that fire is moving at such a phenomenal rate that notice was lagging behind in some capacity. So how much time do you get? That's all going to be predicated on those things that we've mentioned. We should all be prepared, and that's where situational awareness comes in for everybody. Like Alex said, sometimes the neighbors have better information than some of the media gets. We're going to try to push information out as fast as we can to all different hosts of media sites. But you got to remember too that we have a job to do, and we need to engage in this over here primarily, and we can do some of these other functions perhaps a little bit later, or some of those people in that incident command post that the gentleman we're talking about can take up that task and that mission. So it's a tough question to answer. Obviously, if a fire started from a distance away and we have distance on our hand, you're going to get more notice to go. Did I sum it up?
Yeah, I think
Get
that
trained
the,
back.
That's what I meant to say.
the where are you going to get the information? Ideally, you get the information before somebody is knocking on your door telling you to leave. So what I would say there is, in addition to the situational awareness that we've been talking about, make sure you're signing up for Code Red, because depending on the fire behavior, we in the command post will be sizing up the fire activity, looking at the direction and rate of spread, and basically drawing virtual lines on a map and sending notifications. So ideally, you're getting it from there before law enforcement or other fire personnel are actually moving into the areas of evacuation. And that will make our lives easier too, because when we get to a house where people have already left, then we can move on to the next, and we'll be more efficient at our evacuation process.
I think I've heard that question asked a couple of different times, and I think it can't be stated enough that you don't need us to tell you to leave. Even if you're not near the fire, if you feel threatened, leave. You don't have to wait for one of us to tell you to do so. And I think that probably is a message that needs to get out. The situational awareness piece is big, and personal accountability and responsibility. We can only do so much, and there's very few of us in relation to the communities as a whole. And so that situational awareness piece is huge for us. You're that other piece of the puzzle. You know, you make the system work. Things like have a go bag, and I'm gonna repeat a lot of things you've already heard, but have a go bag. Those red flag days, pay attention, like you heard Chief Campbell Guard say. You make sure your car's full of fuel. Make sure you've backed into your driveway. If you're going to park in your garage, make sure you know how to open your garage door if the power goes out. Make sure your cell phone's charged and maintain that battery all day long. Make sure if you have pets, you have a way of getting them out of your house, either into a carrier or a leash. You have dog food, cat food, whatever it is that they like to eat, because they're going to be nervous like you are, right? Make sure you have enough supplies to last you for several hours. Make sure you know how to get out of the area with some escape routes. And then primarily when that happens, if that has to happen, and hopefully never happens, that you're listening to law enforcement and look out for law enforcement and look out for the first responders. You want out, we want in. And we're going to do this.
And then once you're in an area of safety, look to reliable information sources for the information. There are times when certain social media platforms in our community are beneficial as what I would call an early warning system, to tell you that, oh, maybe I need to go start looking for real information, or maybe I need to evacuate based on this information, but that information may end up being incorrect in the long term. If you're getting it from official sources such as fire department, law enforcement, county, state agencies, then that information has been vetted and is correct, or as correct as it can be, but sometimes there's a frustration there, and that's why it's not as efficient or not as speedy as some of the other sources. But we aren't going to put out information that we haven't vetted. Some of the other grassroots informational sources online they're good to monitor, but don't trust them unequivocally. Rather go vet them against other information. And once you're in a point of safety, I would encourage people to really use the official channels to figure out what's going on and decide, what decisions they need to make from there. Nevada County OES has a Facebook page, as do most local agencies around here, from law enforcement to fire. When we're in one of those unified command situations, we are going to be pushing the same information across all those platforms via actually a designated function within the incident command structure, which is going to be the media liaison position. So.
And I know we'll have a new one ready, Nevada County. I think it's launching here.
Yeah, and the hope is, and that's going to be more informational around how to be ready. And no doubt when there's an incident, we'll be sharing across that platform as well. But OES, in especially protracted incidents, tends to be a good spot to go. In the short term, some of the more local government entities have information a little bit quicker.